Hi, welcome to the next webinar in our Navigating Through Volatility webinar series with APICS Inland Empire, sponsored by LMA Consulting Group. We're very excited to be able to talk a bit about the ports today. So I'd like to introduce our speaker, Marisela Caraballo. Oh dear, I should have had you help me practice this. How do I say your last name, Marisela?
Thank you. Marisela Caraballo de Ruggiero.
Ah, okay, thank you. I will defer to Marisela. She is the Director of Trade Development for the Port of Los Angeles, the busiest container port in North America. She was appointed to this position in 2019 and oversees the Trade Development Division and ensuring that the port fulfills its mission to connect U.S. businesses throughout America with overseas trade opportunities, particularly exports. Through trade promotion workshops that encourage increased trade through the Port of Los Angeles. She also oversees the function of intergovernmental relations with foreign governments, advancing the port's influence on expanding trade markets, and is the port's point person to the international diplomatic community. She has purposefully advanced the port's influence on the world stage by negotiating many sister port agreements, promoting trade, environmental stewardship, infrastructure development, supply chain efficiencies, and increased security protocols, all of which is probably very heightened at the moment with our navigating through coronavirus. So, and I'm sure you're quite busy with all of these priorities. So we really appreciate you taking the time to give us a bit of information on the port and also, what's happening currently at the port. So with that said, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for inviting me to speak today before the American Production and Inventory Control Society, the Inland Empire chapter. It's my pleasure to represent the port today. So on behalf of our mayor, our executive director, Jean Soroka, and our board of harbor commissioners, thank you for learning about the port today. So today I'm going to talk about a little bit about our overview, our governance and our structure. I'm going to talk a little bit about the trade tariffs that were implemented the last 2 years by the administration. And then that's going to lead us into where we're at today with COVID-19. I'll kind of wrap it in nicely. So for those of you who are not as familiar with the port, it'll kind of give you some background on how we're structured. Okay. And my apologies, my slide isn't going. There we go. So this is a view of the San Pedro Bay Port Complex that you're seeing before your screen. And I wanted to point out that there are actually two ports in the San Pedro Bay Port Complex. You have LA on one side and you have Long Beach on the other side. If you see that white line, it's just an imaginary line that it's drawn onto the slide. But if you're driving over the bridges in the San Pedro Bay, you really don't know if you're in LA or Long Beach. It kind of gives you an overview. Many people ask, how come both ports do not combine and operate as one? Quite simply, it's the politics of it all. We belong to the city of Los Angeles. We are a department of the city of Los Angeles as the harbor department, but worldwide we're known as the Port of LA. And similar with Long Beach, they belong to the city of Long Beach. So neither city is willing to give up one of its biggest assets, which is our ports. And so we operate cohesively when it comes to the environment, security, and transportation measures. And more recently now, more business matters. But when it comes to the cargo, we are fierce competitors when it comes to which boxes, and we work, courting the shipping lines to bring their boxes to our port complex. So a little bit about our structure. We're over 100 years old. We were founded in 1907. We're under what's known as the State Tidelands Trust, so the state of California entrusted these lands to the city of Los Angeles. We are non-taxpayer supported, so we generate our own revenues. We are basically a landlord port, so we have a business port model. We collect rents from our terminal operators and our tenants, and we are governed by a 5-member board of harbor commissioners, which are appointed by our mayor. So our board of harbor commissioners, usually whenever we get a brand new mayor, we typically get a brand new board of harbor commissioners. So typically a mayor can serve up to 2 terms of 4 years. So we usually have a board. If the mayor is elected twice, for about a total of 8 years. We do have 470 3 acres of land, 3,200 acres of water, so a little bit over 7,500 acres just on the Port of LA side, 270 berths, 27 cargo terminals. Our major boat business is 7 container terminals, and we have 95 ship-to-shore gantry trains. Those are the big cranes that you see moving the cargo off the ships. On the business side, last year we handled 9.3 million TEUs. TEUs is 20-foot equivalent unit container box. Typically what you see being hauled by a truck is a 40-unit container unit. So typically that's 2 TEUs. In 2018, we saw our highest revenue at that point in time. We moved 9.5 million containers in 2018. As a result of the tariffs, we saw a bit of a decline to 9.3 million this past year in 2019. Our lines of business, in addition to containers, which is our main business, we also import vehicles, scrap metal, steel, liquid bulk that goes to your local refineries to turn into gasoline. We receive fruit during the off season. So when California agriculture community is not producing fruit in its winter, we're importing it from South America. And we also handle cruise ships here at the port, and we have a visitor serving center.
Marisela, could you repeat what TEUs are, or explain that?
Sure.
Not everybody's familiar.
So a TEU is a 20-foot equivalent unit container box. And typically a 20-foot unit container box is the industry standard. It's 20 foot in length. Typically what you see being hauled by a big semi truck is a 40-unit container. So the 20s look quite smaller than the 40s, but we're such a large importer that most of our goods come into us in 40-unit containers. Let me go back. So our top trading partners, and this is where it's going to start to get interesting. It's no surprise it's China, Hong Kong, followed by Japan, Vietnam, South Korea, and Taiwan. Our biggest imports. It's everything that you have in your household. It's the furniture. It's what you're wearing today. It's your apparel. It's your footwear. It's your electronics. It's your auto parts. And what are our biggest exports? It's our waste paper. It's our animal feeds, our fabrics, raw cotton, scrap metal. And these are the port rankings by millions of TEUs. So I did mention that we are the largest port in the Western Hemisphere, or the busiest port in the Western Hemisphere, followed by our neighbor in Long Beach. And then it's New York, New Jersey, Panama, Savannah, Seattle, Tacoma, Vancouver in Canada, Manzanillo in Mexico, Hampton Roads in Houston. If you look at us globally, combined with our neighbor, LA and Long Beach, we rank 16.9. We rank 9th in the world, moving 16.9 million TEUs. And this is quite a difference. When I first started working at the port over 17 years ago, we were ranked 3rd in the world. So that just kind of shows you how quickly ports around the globe, in particular in Asia and in China, have come up and surpassed our rankings. And then the bottom graph, it kind of shows you a month-to-month comparison from 2017, 2018, and 2019, when the cargo started increasing. And if you look at 2018, one thing I do want to point out, you see towards the end of the year, that graph kind of gets a little bit higher. And that's because people were trying to beat the Chinese tariffs before the following new year when the implementation was going to take place. So that given, that was an opportunity for folks to beat those duties. And we saw an uptick, which kind of related to our 2018 numbers, why we saw an increase up to 9.5 million TEUs that year. Another thing I wanted to point out is that our growth in ships calling at the port has increased. In 2017 and 2018, we saw just in that 1 year alone, a 57% increase in 13 TEU vessels coming into the port. In this line, what you see here is the CMA CGM Benjamin Franklin. When this vessel came in, it was an 18,000 TEU vessel. You can see how large it is. And if you see the vessel in the slide, just directly behind this vessel, it's an 8,000 TEU vessel, but it looks so dwarfed next to the 18,000 TEU vessel that it looks like it's tugboat. So these are the types of vessels that are coming into the port complex. So our impact of tariffs on trade, and this is just a short comparison from January through July of 2018 versus 2019. We saw less imports from China. We saw a 9.6% increase from all other nations. Our exports decreased, specifically to China. And if you look at the chart, China bought less soybeans, less glass, less rubber, grain, scrap metal, fruit, logs and lumbers, and automobiles. And this is part of the whole tariff war that we have with China currently. And we saw shift. Growth is shifting in Asia. So since we weren't receiving so much imports from China, we saw increases from Cambodia, Vietnam, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, and Malaysia. And we saw exports increase to Singapore and Malaysia. Just to kind of give you an overview of what we were dealing with.
Yeah, that's very interesting. We had a question too about the rankings that you were talking about.
Yeah.
Are they based on dollar volume, trade volume, or do you know what they're based on?
Yes, so those rankings are based specifically on TEU count, so
Okay.
the number of containers going through our port system.
Okay, and if anybody has questions, please put them through the Q&A or the chat box, and I'll be happy to ask them as it fits into the conversation. So yeah, thank you. Very interesting so far.
Great. So it's no surprise our economic impact to the region and nationally is quite huge. So here at the port for the city of Los Angeles, we have just under 900 employees working at the port. And any given time, we have 10 to 15,000 longshoremen and women at our docks. If you look at just Los Angeles and Long Beach, we account for 1 in 12 jobs. If you look at us in a 5-county region, which also includes the IE, we account for 1 in 9 jobs, 3 million jobs across the state. And our cargo does hit the 435 congressional districts throughout the United States. And our total trade volume is over 311 billion, and that's based on value. And we are a gateway of connectivity. So one of the reasons the cargo does tend to come to the Port of LA is not only because we've invested heavily in our infrastructure over the years, but we're also a mega region of 22 million consumers. We have a strong longshore workforce here present. We have about 1.8 billion square feet of warehouse distribution centers, a lot of that in the IE. We can handle up to 100 trains daily to and from the LA basin. On any given day, we're probably running about 30 to 50 trains a day coming in and out of the complex. The 2 major railroad carriers is Union Pacific and Burlington Northern Santa Fe. And we have access to the major freight hubs. So Chicago, Memphis, San Antonio, Kansas City, New York, Atlanta, Houston, Denver, and Dallas. One thing I do like about this map, it kind of shows you the transit times. So if you take a look at the dark green lines, you take a look at from Shanghai to LA, Long Beach, it takes 13 days for the ship to cross the Pacific. Once that ship arrives here, arrives at 8 in the morning, by 12 midnight, that terminal has already built 2 trains, over 300 cars in length, double stacked. So we're looking at over 600 containers on its way to anywhere in the United States. And if I pick Chicago, it's going to be there by day 18. When it gets to Chicago, it's going to take a day or 2 for it to get to a distribution center and to a store. So by day 20, those goods are ready on the shelves to be sold. If you're going to go through the Panama Canal, you're still sailing. It's going to take 25 to 26 days to get the Gulf or the East Coast of the United States. So when it comes to bringing goods in from Asia, we are the preferred port of entrance, not only because the investments we made at the port complex, but also the infrastructure that we have on our highways and railroad systems and our constant improvement into those infrastructure assets. So this gets us to where we are today. Many folks have been asking, did the port shut down? No, at no point did the port ever shut down. The port is open for business. The governor's emergency order states ports are essential infrastructure to keeping the supply chain moving. Everybody's at work. The terminals are open. Ships are arriving. Longshore workers are on the docks. Truckers are picking up cargo and dropping off cargo. The railroads are running. Warehouses are receiving deliveries. Distribution centers are processing orders. And we've also implemented a lot of safety precautions. We were very fortunate that DWP was able to share 14,000 gallons of industrial bleach to the port. And our port staffers in the construction and maintenance division, along with our hazmat unit, mixed those industrial bleach and turned it into sanitizers and inserted it and made bottles of 32 spray bottles. We distribute that to our terminal operators. So the evening shifts are starting 1 hour later, and that's allowing cargo handling equipment and radios to be sanitized before the next shift of workers come in. Folks are wearing face masks and gloves are being worn. So a lot of precautions are being taken so folks do not spread the coronavirus anywhere while they're working. And then just to give you an update for today, today we have 17 vessels in port. We have 9 container vessels, 1 liquid bulk vessel, 1 dry bulk vessel, and we have 3 cruise ships. Now, mind you, those cruise ships, one was arriving today offloading passengers. They had been out at sea for quite some time. They were only allowed to come in because no one tested, and they have been quarantined for over a month at sea. And the U.S. Mercy is still in at our harbor. And all the terminals are open, and we have no issues with the workforce.
So we have a couple of questions, if it's
Sure.
okay if I break in here. So what is being done to reduce the truck traffic and pollution from the port? A loaded question for you.
Well, right now there's no traffic. And if you've been listening to the reports by CARB and South Coast AQMG, that's the South Quality Air Quality Management District, all of Southern California is at record lows because no one is using the highways at the current system.
True.
But if you're looking at when we're going to normal hours,
I think that must be the question.
Yeah. So in our normal everyday pre-COVID-19, the ports implemented the Clean Air Action Plan back in 2006. And since then, we've had many radiations. We're on our 3rd version of our Clean Air Action Plan. So we have a clean truck program that's using the lowest, cleanest diesel fuel available to date. And we're also testing for near zero and zero emission trucks. So and that's just only one piece. We're also working with the shipping lines. So when they come into the port, they can turn off their bunker fuel engines, and they can plug into electrical shoreside power. Those are just a few of the measures that we're working on here at the port.
Very good. Yeah, and I have heard some good things about a lot of those programs. There's some very aggressive goals.
Yeah, very aggressive goals. And I will say, because we've been making these goals voluntarily, we've been able to also get a lot of subsidies from the federal government and the state government and the local air quality management district to fund productions of testing new equipment. So part of it is sometimes we get it right when we're testing equipment, and sometimes we don't get it right. And that's part of the research and development phase and trying to find the right pieces of those equipment.
Very good. And then we have a question here about what % of the containers leave by rail versus truck? Do you have an idea?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. About half. So when we talked a little bit earlier, we talked about the 22 million consumers here in the Southern California region. So half of those consumers most likely are basically staying in this region for our own consumption. The other half is what we call our discretionary cargo, and that's going to throughout the rest of the United States. And that's the cargo that everybody fights for. So that's the cargo that the Port of Long Beach wants to take away from us, Oakland wants to take away from us, Seattle, Tacoma wants to take away from us. But because we built the infrastructure and we have the infrastructure in place to move that cargo, luckily it's still coming here to LA.
Oh, interesting. And now we have another question. We have a couple more questions. So how is the shipping congestion at the Chinese ports affecting the activity level at the LA ports?
Good question. So you know what, I'm going to take that into the next slide. Okay. And then I'll kind of explain where we're at today. Well, how this all started.
Okay, and then part 2 to that, so that you know it up front, is he's asking, once the congestion clears up in China, do you expect congestions at the LA port? So I can remind you though if you.
Okay, and then if you just, I'll get to that like in about 2 slides.
Yep, no problem.
I'll kind of set it up on what occurred once we had the COVID-19 episode.
Perfect.
So when the impact of the COVID, the port started working with our federal authorities even more closely, because we have a lot of federal oversight here at the port complex. That's the U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and the Center for Disease Control. So vessels pre-arriving screenings is done by U.S. Coast Guard and CBP 96 hours prior to arrival, and those are all the vessels. Those are your container ships, your tankers, your breakbulk cargo, your auto carriers. It is your cruise ships and any other vessel that's going to come to the port. They are required to report any illness of crew member or passenger. Failure to report can be up to a fine of $96,000 per incident. Any affected person is quarantined on a vessel. As of today, we have no reports of COVID-19 coming in from a vessel. Since the beginning of February through March, and actually through April 1st, we've had 41 canceled ship sailings as a result of this. And that was because a lot of those ports in Asia were shut down, including the ports in China. They extended their Chinese New Year because they went into lockdown mode like we're currently working from home or being quarantined. So as a result, in February, we saw a 22.9% drop in overall volumes as a result. And that's comparing February 2019 to February of this year, 2020. In March, we just saw a 31.3% decline in volumes. And that's because a lot of those ports in Asia were shut down because they weren't operating. So
it's actually not that bad, though. I mean, it could have been that. That seems actually pretty good from my viewpoint, since they were shut down. But I guess most of the essential businesses must have been running to ship product.
Yeah, and there was a lot of cargo that was sitting at the docks that were not able to be loaded in Asia because their ports were shut down. So cargo was still coming in, but not at the volumes and not at the number of levels that we're used to. So that's why there were so many canceled ships sailing, because they weren't able to fill those ships. And they weren't going to make that crossing with an empty vessel. So our first quarter decrease, we're seeing a total decrease about 18.7 in our first quarter. Chinese production was definitely impacted, and that's why we're seeing less impact. But we also have a full book of business in Southeast Asia. So we have cargo coming in from Vietnam, Indonesia, and Malaysia as well. And then here we're going to talk about some of the impacts. So we saw empty containers stacking up. Exports were not leaving fast enough. And that was because those container ships were not coming in to offload. So then we couldn't reload them to go back to exports. So our executive director worked very closely with the shipping lines and the industry. And the shipping lines did answer the calls of the industry to move out empties. They committed to bringing in mega vessels to pick up the empty containers. And they committed to 23,000 TEU ships were to arrive empty. And the first arrival, one of these empty mega ships, arrived on March 31st. And basically, they are here to pick up all the empty containers in our export cargo. So when that first wave of imports start to come in, we will be able to clear our terminal operations to have those yards clear so we can start receiving the imports.
Well, that's interesting. That's great.
What's also very interesting too for us is that we do have visibility is essential for us to operate our port. The fluidity of our supply chain is key. Luckily, we're able to forecast 14 days out for the types of cargo arriving. That's because we implemented the port network. It's called the Port Optimizer. So you have the terminal operators, the shipping lines, the beneficial cargo, everyone's providing their data so we can see what's coming in before it arrives. And that 14-day view allows everyone to plan their workforce, which makes it very, very interesting for us and how we're able to plan the workforce. So the impact of the COVID-19, and then just getting back to the question, just wanted to make sure I was able to answer the question for your participant.
Yeah, thank you. I think you did. So he was interested in the congestion in China, which it sounds like, they're picking it up, or, it's being dealt with. And then if we're gonna, the effects that'll come after that. So I think you did.
Great. All right, so then I'm going to bring up a little bit what's known as the U.S. Navy ship Mercy that arrived at the port on Friday, March 27th. It's a 1,000-bed hospital, 12 operating rooms. It's only going to be treating non-COVID-19 patients. It's the purpose is to handle the overflow of acute trauma centers and allows hospitals to focus on the COVID-19 patients. And it's also going to allow us to prepare for the first wave of imports that are going to be coming in as well.
Well, and speaking of which, we had a request. I don't know, maybe at the end or whenever, but he asked if you could show us the Mercy birth on the map or photo, and maybe it was one of your prior slides.
Okay. Yeah, when we go back towards the end of the presentation, I'll come back to one of the previous slides. I'll go back to the port area and point it out. Currently, the U.S. Mercy ship is at one of our cruise terminals. So if you are familiar with our port complex and you know where the Vincent Thomas Bridge is located, if you're driving over the Vincent Thomas Bridge going towards Long Beach, if you look over your left-hand side, you'll be able to see the ship berth at the cruise terminal. But I'll point that out on the map.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. So we, as I mentioned earlier, we are operated by, we are a city department, and our head person is our mayor of Los Angeles. So LA Mayor Garcetti named the port's executive director, Chief Logistics Officer. There's a picture of our mayor and there's a picture of our executive director, Dean Soroka. Primarily to help with the creation of the Logistics Victory LA campaign. It's a coordinated effort to link the medical supplies with the medical community and organizations in need. It's a resource center to prevent competition and price gouging. Unfortunately, what we have seen and with the hospitals and folks that are trying to get that personal protective equipment is that something that before that was $2 is now being charged, $12. We've seen ventilators to help people to breathe in the hospitals. Pre-COVID, those were $12,000 pieces of equipment. Now they're being sold for $45,000. So there's a lot of price gouging in the system, and that's one thing we're trying to prevent. During this crisis, it's not a time to, make a profit. And our governor and our mayor said we're not going to be paying, price gouging. So we're hoping to help the city and the sources with those goods. So we launched the LoveLAorg website, and it's basically if you are a manufacturer or producer, you click onto the Have Supplies link and you put in your information in. If you need supplies, you put in the supplies that you're looking for, the quantities that you need, and we're going to try to connect that for you. The city is actively purchasing and procuring these pieces of equipment. So we'll kind of be holding these equipment, and we're not doing it to make a profit. We're buying it at the lowest possible price and getting it to the medical community and those in need of it. There's also a link to donate. So if there's folks that want to donate, the city is happy to take those donations on behalf of our medical community. And just the other day, Apple donates 160,000 face shields. We also had Harbor Freight donated 9,500 face shields today to LoveLA. So those keep coming in. And the medical community needs are those N95 masks, the examination gloves, the isolation gowns, the ventilators, intrusive and non-intrusive, and the IV drip apparatuses. All right, so what are our impact of COVID-19 and what's our April outlook? So we have some good news. So just in the last week, our workforce labor is up 20%, and that's the highest level in 2 months. So that's starting to kind of show an uptick in where we're moving in April. We're moving about 80 to 85% of our normal cargo capacity. That's a huge improvement from 2 months ago. And Chinese production is at 50% capacity, and their manufacturing is continuing to be ramped up. We anticipate a 10% uptick in cargo volumes this month. We're evacuating those empty containers, getting ready for the flow of imports. And we're also making sure the export cargoes that have been waiting to go are actually leaving and getting to their destinations. We're continuing to work with the entire supply chain and port stakeholders. And August is traditionally the beginning of our peak season. Now, nothing of this year has been normal. So it's going to be interesting to see what August looks like and what our peak season looks like. That's also
very true.
That's also going to be like when everyone's ramping up again. So depending on what's happening in our economy, we have been hearing that some retailers have not been placing in their big orders like they typically do, because folks, they're staying at home, they're not buying as much as, it's interesting when you kind of stay home, you're not going out as much, you're not spending as much. I'm sure people are doing online shopping, but not enough to what the normal economy is used to. So August is going to be very interesting for us. And we're going to be continuing to work with the medical community, identifying the medical supplies and shipments, and making sure that those shipments are moving much quicker through the supply chain. And that's kind of a wrap up where we're at today with COVID-19. I included my contact information. So if folks, want to connect with me afterwards, or if you're working with companies that do want to participate in LoveLA, I'm happy to help facilitate that. My email address is on there as well.
Excellent. And I have several questions too, but I didn't want to interrupt you because you were going through parts that were unrelated to the question.
Okay. And then with that, Lisa, do you want me to go back to the aerial?
Yeah, sure. Why don't we do that? That's a great idea.
I'll go back to where the Mercy is berthed at. So there's kind of a picture of the Mercy coming into our harbor. All right. So in this screen, can you guys see me moving my mouse?
Yep, we can see.
Okay, so this is the Vincent Thomas Bridge. And then actually right here, there's a cruise ship berth at our cruise terminal. And that is where currently the US Mercy is berthed at. So, and this is the 110 freeway going southward ends into San Pedro. So if you're coming from downtown Los Angeles or the 91 that's up here, you can take the 91 to the 110 south, go over the Vincent Thomas Bridge, and you'll see the Mercy ship.
Very interesting. Well, good. And it shows how expansive the port really is. So let's see here. So David is asking, that was the question you just answered. Thank you. All right. So next one is a question about how automated is the Port of LA, like compared to Singapore? Or whatever you might want to compare to that might be meaningful.
Okay, well, a lot of Singapore, like one example, they're, I believe, almost 100% automated. So a very different operations than we do. We only have one terminal that is partially automated, and I'm going to point. It's kind of the sign is in the middle of the way, but it's kind of shaped like a 7. And that is our trade pack terminal. And this side of the terminal is automated. So when a ship pulls in here into berth, the crane operators are still manned. When they drop the containers, they drop it on the other side of this fence line. And anything on that fence line is automated. So you have a green handler, container handler will come in, pick it up, take it to a stack that's either going to be picked up by a trucker, or it's going to go into a stack to be built for a train, for rail. And that is the only terminal right now that is partially automated. Now, if we go to Pier 400, down here, this is our largest container terminal, just under 500 acres, just to give you some scale. I believe it makes up about 6 or 7 Disneylands. So it's very large. Even to drive from one end to the other end takes about 20 to 30 minutes. In this container terminal, they just purchased some automated equipment, or they're getting ready to do some cargo handling equipment that is partially automated. That hasn't gone into built yet, but they will have some partial equipment, but they will still be manned.
Very good. Do you know about future automation plans, or is, or I should say, automation isn't everything, but like, how do we stay competitive, or how do we gain in our competitiveness? Because obviously people have a choice of where to send cargo.
Yeah, I think for us, the way we've been staying competitive, it's about building our infrastructure up. So if we go back to the beginning days of the Port of Los Angeles, this area that you see here, and I'm kind of moving my mouse around the terminal island, really wasn't, it was just kind of little swamp areas. And a lot of this land is man-made. So the port has invested in the infrastructure to be able to move cargo. If you take a look at our cargo, our terminal operations centers, I'm familiar with it, but I'm going to point out all of our cargo terminals have on-dock rails. So at Pier 400, you kind of see like these lines towards the back. That is rail. Now this white line, you can't see it, but underneath that white line, there's a bunch of rail lines. You can see some of the rail lines on this side. If you look at this terminal, that's Pier 300. You see rail on the back end. If you go to this terminal, you see the rail over on this side and on this side. If you come over to Tray Pack, you see the rail on this side. Come over here across the bay, you see rail all the way around here. So when we're talking about moving cargo efficiently, when I talked about that ship coming in at 8 o'clock in the morning and it docks at one of our terminals, and by 12 midnight, they were already unloaded enough containers to build 2 trains to go to Chicago. And those trains can carry anywhere between 600 to 750 containers on its way to Chicago. That's how we stay competitive. Now, getting back to your question about automation, is that going to make us more efficient? That is the million-dollar question. Automated equipment is very, very expensive. Labor will tell you that they are more productive and more reliable than automated equipment. Others in the terminal operation world, they feel that with the terminal equipment, yes, they may run a little bit slower, but they could run 24/7, where labor typically works a day shift and a night shift. So there's 2 arguments to that coin, and having automation does not necessarily mean you're going to be more efficient. And then also to point out, in California, or actually in the United States, labor is a very strong workforce here in the West Coast. The longshore labor workforce is not just in LA and Long Beach. They are the labor union for the entire West Coast of the United States. So that's California, that is Oregon, that is Washington, that is Alaska, and that is Hawaii. So if they decide to strike, and you may recall back in 2002, they were on strike where they walked off their jobs because they did not have a labor contract for 9 days. Then President George W. Bush had to enact the Taft-Hartley Act to force those folks to go back to work because the economy was losing billions of dollars a day because that cargo was not coming in. You had factories in Detroit that had to shut down because those on-time delivery parts for their manufacturing lines were not being delivered. So, like I said, it's a very delicate balancing act here in the United States when it comes to labor. So automation is not necessarily always your answer.
Well, that is true. That is true across the board, I have to say. I mean, automation, there's a lot of advantages to it. It's using it where it makes sense, for sure. Let's see, we have more questions here. Do different types of cargo get handled differently in terms of offloading, storing, transporting, etc.?
Yes, so there's some cargo that comes in refrigerated containers, and those are typically your fruit products, or your food products, or your meat products, your fruits and vegetables. Sometimes there's certain equipment that's very sensitive, medical equipment that has to come in full storage as well. But when it comes to moving it, it's just the type of container that it's stored in. Or if you've got scrap metal, or let's say steel coming in, or fruit coming in, that's coming in breakable. It's a little bit a different way that it's handled for the ship.
Makes sense. Let's see. And are you familiar with a fast boat shipment option? If so, what is it?
I haven't heard of a fast boat shipment option.
Okay. I haven't either, but I don't know. Okay, so then let's see here. Thanks for illustrating the system and the current state. At this moment, in looking ahead to economic and trade recovery, what are POLA's current priorities and changes for capital improvements and reallocations over the coming year?
Well, we're gonna have to go back to our board because last week our board approved our draft budget for our next fiscal year. Now, that was when we started to see, we did see some declines in February and March, but we're starting to anticipate. We saw the first few weeks of April, kind of a cargo coming back in, more ships coming in every day. Ships that were canceled in the past are now coming back online. So we thought, okay, we're going to be able to hopefully survive this year. Not too bad. But every day is changing. You know, our mayor on Sunday gave his state of the city address, where he's calling for, 10% pay cut for city employees. I'm asking for employees to furlough 26 days because the coffer is going to take a big hit because the tax money isn't coming in. Our department's a little bit different because we're not taxpayer supported. So we generate our revenues by our terminal operators paying their rents. And thus far, our terminal operators have been able to meet those commitments. We haven't had any serious issues with receiving our payments, though we do anticipate that some payments might be a little bit difficult for some of the months, and we're working with our terminal operators on those instances. But we don't see a huge effect. But at the same time, things are changing every single day, and we will have to adjust accordingly. And it's too early to tell what the remainder of this year is going to look like.
Well, that's, what I'm seeing across the board is agility and flexibility and, constant, being quick about what's happening and changing it is going to be absolutely essential, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
So we have more questions here. So what is the significant bottleneck at the LA ports? It's kind of a broad question, but what would you say?
Yeah, you know what? There isn't one single bullet that is the bottleneck. It's going to be a range of issues that's going to create the bottleneck. The bottleneck just isn't one container ship or one trucking community or longshore labor. It's the system of systems. So if any part of the system stops working, then that will create the bottleneck for the entire part of the system. So if the ships aren't arriving, then that creates a slowdown for the workforce. Once the ship starts to arrive, we take them in as they come. We have the workforce to be able to handle that cargo, and we have the trucking community to handle that cargo, and so on and so forth. Everything keeps moving. So I wouldn't just say there's one bottleneck. It's the whole system working together. It's the truckers, it's the chassis providers, it is the warehouses, the distribution centers, and the ability of the shipping lines to stay on their rotations, and the cargo operators or terminal operators to load and offload those ships.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, bottlenecks move around as well. So like you said, when the empties were all sitting there, that was the bottleneck, and now that they're moving, the bottleneck moves somewhere else.
Yeah, and the system is starting to flow again.
That's good. I mean, that is encouraging. Now we have a question here saying that we're seeing about 3 to 10 days delivery to the Ontario area after the vessel arrives at the port. What do you think is the standard, or is that the standard?
That's typically the standard. So when a ship comes in, it takes them anywhere between 1 to 5 days to offload that ship, or 1 to 3 days depending on the size of the vessel. So if it's a smaller ship, an 8,000 TEU vessel or 10,000 TEU vessel, that's usually offloaded within 3 days. If you're looking at a bigger ship, if it's coming in on a 15,000 TEU vessel, that's probably going to take about 3 to 5 days to offload. So really, that is really not a long time for it to get to the IE, because it's getting offloaded, and depending on where it is on that rotation. So when the cargo is loaded on a ship, believe it or not, it's kind of loaded in some kind of logistical way. Some of the cargo that's at the very top of the ship, that cargo is meant to go on railroad right away. There's a need for that cargo to get off. Somebody paid for that cargo to be kind of in first class to get offloaded. So it depends on the beneficial cargo owner how quickly they want the product moved.
Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way before. Well, it kind of relates to this other question we have here. And we saw a video, I think, on this topic once, but basically the question is, I know you have a manifest of what's in the containers. How do you know exactly what's in them, or maybe where it's in them?
Mm-hmm.
Have there been gross errors with shipments in that respect?
So the manifest is a tool. After 9/11 in 2005, Congress passed the Safe Port Act, and it required that folks share their manifest 96 hours before they leave that port of origin on its way throughout the United States. We do not review the manifest. U.S. Customs and Border Protection reviews that manifest. They are the ones who determine the cargo when it arrives here in the United States, what cargo needs to be inspected or re-inspected. and they make that determination.
Got it. Okay. Well, and I thought there was some sort of a audit digital type project or something where you could see more about where exactly on the ship something is located. Is there some kind of an initiative about that?
Yes, so we are working on a platform, a digital platform known as the Port Optimizer. And I talked about that a little bit earlier in the presentation. It gives us our 14-day window of what's coming in throughout the entire supply chain. We want it to be like when you order Domino's pizza and you're on the app or you're on the website, you place your order and then you get the screen that says your order's been placed, it's being made, it's in the oven, it's boxed, it's on its way to you, and it made it to your doorstep. We eventually would like our Port Optimizer to be that efficient. Okay, cargo is loaded, it's on the ship, ship is in transit, ship arrives at port, container box is offloaded, it's waiting to go either on a truck or rail. Okay, that container is going on a truck or it's going on rail. Okay, it's on its way to its destination. It arrives at distribution center. Now it arrives at the storefront or arrives to that beneficial cargo owner. That is what we're trying to do with the Port Optimizer. But for it to work, everyone in the supply chain has to provide that information. One of the issues that we do sometimes have is that people want the information, but not everybody wants to share their information.
Correct.
A lot of the companies that we're working with, they're not companies here locally. There are companies that are rooted, have their headquarters somewhere else in the globe. And not everybody wants to share that data. But I will say our executive director has been very successful in working with our stakeholders and having those conversations to get folks to share that data. And that is part of the improvements of the Port Optimizer that we keep working on.
Yeah, that would be great. It would be like an Amazon like experience along the way.
Absolutely. Your package is arriving, your container is arriving.
That's right. That would be really helpful actually, because I know a lot of clients go through a lot of effort to try to figure out where everything is and then how it relates back to their systems.
Yeah.
So actually that brings up a point in or a question from me is, do you ever have plans where the feedback from the Port Optimizer could like integrate with manufacturing and distribution like systems so that we could, like say, oh, this should be arriving on this date because of the projections from the Port Optimizer or something?
Yes, that is part of the goal. Okay. And then one thing that I did want to add too regarding the Port Optimizer is, a key part of this is also our federal authorities that are part of the system, which is U.S. Coast Guard and U.S. Customs and Border Protection, because CBP does inspect those containers. And let's say if your container for whatever reason was flagged, let's say the manifest wasn't filled out correctly, or they suspect, when they, it was on dock, there was something kind of funky regarding that container and it gets taken off, somewhere else to be inspected and open, you would be able to know that that container box was also being secondary inspected and looked and open. Because I know sometimes when cargo does come in, and if you happen to be that beneficial cargo owner of that box that went to secondary, inspection, it's a really hard time for you to track that. It takes some time. So we're also working with CBP to be able to track those as well.
Yeah, interesting. And so it spurred on a couple other questions here. So are you talking about trackers on the individual containers to make them real-time visible?
We're not necessarily talking about trackers. Some of the containers already do have RFID tags that the beneficial cargo owner has access to because they're the ones who are tracking that cargo per se. And it's up to them whether they want to share that information with us. And like we said, this is an information sharing platform. So the information, everybody has a piece of their puzzle. And now the question is sharing all that piece of that puzzle with the Port Optimizer community. Yeah,
makes sense. Okay, so we have a question here. Who is your tech development platform partner for the coming Port Optimizer that you've been describing?
That's a good question. I do not know who our tech operator is, but if you whoever asked that question sends me an email, I'll put you in touch with our IT folks that help build the system. But wait, I'm sorry, our IT for the Port Optimizer. Sorry, I was thinking Cybersecurity Center. So Port Optimizer is actually GE Transportation.
Okay.
We worked closely with GE Transportation to build the Port Optimizer.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and you're right. Cybersecurity, actually, that does bring up a good point. Cybersecurity, I know, is a really large problem these days, even pre-coronavirus, but it's even worse now. I guess you're just becoming more and more vigilant on that topic at the port, or?
Oh, we've been working on security for quite some time. So going back to after 9/11, our world of how security is viewed here at the ports changed drastically. And we worked closely with the federal government over the years in Congress. We worked very diligently to get the Safe Port Act of 2005 to be enacted and passed in Congress, and the president signed it. It allowed for over $400 million of security funds to go not only to our port, but to our nation's ports. And ever since then, that program continues to be funded at different levels, but all ports in the United States have benefited from that security program. But the port has always been very ahead of its time. In 2014, the port opened its own port security operations center here at the Port of LA. And our port operations center handles everything in our department. And believe it or not, on any given month, we have over 20 million intrusion attempts per month. That equates to 7 to 8 attempts per second on our little city server. So that just tells you how big cyber hacking and cybersecurity is.
Wow.
In the last several years, we saw a lot of our partners in the industry get hit. Maersk out of Copenhagen was hit with a cyber attack that cost their company over $400 million because they had to replace their computer systems and their servers, not in Copenhagen, but worldwide. You had the Port of Barcelona attack, you had OOCL attack, you had the Port of San Diego attack. So cybersecurity is something that's very relevant here in the Port of LA. Even so, even our executive director once again is taking that leadership role, working with our port stakeholders. And we actually 2 years ago convened a meeting with all of our port stakeholders specifically to address this, because once again, we're all different companies, we're all housed in different countries. A lot of these companies that own these shipping lines and terminal operations are also partly government owned in their country of origin. So a lot of companies don't want to turn over that information to the United States government. So the port said, we're going to work on creating a cloud, a digital platform similar to the telecommunications industry and the banking industry. And we'll be the server where people can share their information, provide that data into the Port of LA. If you feel like you're getting hacked or there's a cybersecurity threat in your system, share it with us and we'll get it out to the port community. And our board just a few months ago approved the budget for us to build that platform. So earlier when we were talking about who is our IT building the cloud, I had port security on my mind because we just got that approved.
Well, so I have one last question, and then I wanted to wrap up and make sure folks knew about our upcoming webinars, and see if you would be okay if we posted a link to your PDF presentation as well. How are ships scheduled to dock? Is there something like a control tower in airports?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we don't have like a control tower, but we do have the Marine Exchange. And the Marine Exchange is a nonprofit entity that also used to be run by the U.S. Coast Guard. But the U.S. Coast Guard is also housed there, and it's kind of like if you Google that Marine Exchange, you'll be able to check out their website, and you can kind of see it's not specifically on time for security purposes, but they're able, if you're part of the network, you can track whatever ship around the world going to its destination.
Interesting. Well, and actually, because one of our board members threw in a question here, I wanted to ask you one more, if that's okay.
Of course.
He's asking if the port is using blockchain technology, because we do hear a lot about blockchain and whether
yes. So there's a lot of blockchain discussions taking place globally, and our executive director, Jean Soroka, has been in many of those conversations about blockchain development. And then there's a lot of, everyone has a different method. So a lot of the ports in Europe are using blockchain capabilities, but everyone's using a different platform. So there isn't uniformity globally on what's being utilized. In our port complex, we went with a port optimizer digitalization cloud network. and how we're working with our stakeholders. So still to be worked on the global issue, but right now each port is handling it differently.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. So it's hard because you had so much great information here but do you have any wrap up, like, themes or thoughts that you think we should be thinking about?
Sure. So I just want to say the port is open for business. So regardless of COVID-19, we are still operating. And I'm saying that wholeheartedly because in the very beginning of this, there were bad actors out there saying that we were closed. And that was not the case. We've never shut down. So we are open for business.
That's a really good point because, not everybody is aware. So, and to that point, do you guys have, is there a web page, I assume, on your website that might talk to some of these topics and the statistics?
Yes, if you do visit www.portoflosangeles.org, you can go to our website, and we've actually created a new kind of platform on COVID-19. So you can see how many ships are in today. You can see where things are moving. You can get all the updates. Our executive director is doing a weekly video every week, updating our stakeholders. So please tune in to take a look at Jean's video on a weekly basis, or if you're interested, send me an email and I'll send it to you every week.
Wow, that's awesome. Thank you. I want to really thank you for such a great presentation. It was really informative. And I wanted to thank our board member, Elizabeth Warren, who referred us to you. So thank you to Elizabeth, who can't respond, but I know she's listening. And because it was extremely valuable. And we really appreciate it. It's certainly a critical portion of our end-to-end supply chain of almost every manufacturing company gets something from somewhere else, as well as distribution. So it's integral to everything we do. And so it's great to have this. We'll post it online as we've been doing with our other Navigating Through Volatility webinar series. And with that said, I'd like to talk about the upcoming webinars. We have moving manufacturing to Mexico. What would it take? So there's, that's an option that folks are considering versus Asia. And so that's going to be coming up on April 28th. We also have a webinar on really how do we create a closer client relationship, a closer customer relationship, which is really critical for the ongoing success of our manufacturers and distributors in this community, especially in times like this. How do we get them coming back to us and not reevaluating where they should be going? And so that's going to be on May 4th. We also have confirmed that we're going to have Esri talk with us about data and what they've been doing with lots of companies during this time and how they're utilizing that data. We'll stay tuned. We'll have that on our website shortly. And we're also putting together a panel of manufacturing executives in this in the Southern California area to talk about how we can be competitive with versus the extended supply chain, or in combination with it. So how are manufacturers doing in this during this time, and what can we do to help them? And so and actually I also just did get confirmation today that the Inland Empire Economic Partnership is going to put us in touch with one of the healthcare providers. We could talk a bit about supply chain in the healthcare field, and perhaps a economic update and what the business leaders in the Inland Empire are seeing. So thank you to the IEEP for that. So we have several upcoming webinars that are here to help our members better navigate during this time of crisis, if you will. And then really a lot of these are best practices we should be doing regardless. So it's, how do we take the learnings and be successful? We have bunches of recorded webinars already online about navigating the global supply chain, about, the different countries that we are importing and exporting from and what's happening there, freight flows and impacts. How do we manage this bullwhip effect of having everything in the wrong places, and coronavirus and impact on employees? So we've had a wealth of information. So hopefully you'll join us for our upcoming webinars. And we appreciate everyone's support in helping the manufacturing and supply chain community thrive through this period of time. And I want to thank you very much, Marisela from the Port of LA for supporting us.
Thank you, Lisa. And to you and to all your members, wishing you continued health, remaining in good spirits during this difficult time. And we'll see what our new normal looks like when we all return back to work. Hopefully
that's right.
Soon.
Yes, I hope so. But I think it's going to be an extended evolution. So it'll be interesting to see how this all works out. But we can have some impact on our future. So let's have a positive one, right? So anyway, thank you very much. And we will be posting this online. Thanks again, Marisela.
Thank you.